So much for joining us. Up to 15% of couples struggle with trying to conceive, and with up to 30% of couples who do conceive suffering at least one miscarriage. So increasing evidence indicates that our lifestyle choices, such as personal care and food product purchases, can impact our health and fertility. However, exposure to toxic chemicals can also impact pregnancies, as well as the development of young children. So those who struggled with conception and pregnancy already deal with emotions like guilt and shame. We're finding that more and more people learn about the roles of environmental toxicants on their fertility and pregnancy. The guilt and shame has increased even more. That's why we're really happy today to be joined by Jerry Henderson. Jerry is a coach, author, and speaker who specializes in trauma, guilt, and shame. So we're going to discuss the shame cycle, the power of curiosity in healing, and how to promote self-love. So I saw Jerry. Here you are. Hi, Jerry.
Hello, how are you doing, my friend?
Good. Nice
Good to
seeing
see you.
Yep.
Having a
You have
good
a great
day so
weekend?
far? I did. I had a really good weekend. Got a lot done. And then yesterday I was able to relax. Was just able to kind of kick back and enjoy myself. How about you?
It was pretty good. I was up in Tahoe, so it got a little bit of nature,
Good.
which was really nice. Now today, just like diving all work.
Good. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for letting me be here, hosting me. It's an honor. It's an honor to be here with you.
Likewise, that's exactly what I'm going to say. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a coach in trauma, guilt, and shame.
Yeah. So, this really just comes from my story. So I grew up as a child who experienced trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, which led to a real deep sense of shame, which isn't uncommon. It's very common, right, for people who experience trauma, especially as a child, to then begin to feel like there's something wrong with you, which then led to that deep sense of shame, which then led to addictions, other things in my life. And as my journey for like 40 years of carrying that feeling, eventually things kind of imploded, right? I couldn't sustain what I was carrying. And then as a result of that, I tried to figure out, how do I heal my life? What does that look like? What is the processes that I need to use in order to address the shame, to heal the trauma, and then just really went on a journey to discover that. And as a result of that, I just started sharing my story, sharing the lessons that I learned with people. And they began to ask me, like, how can I help them in their journey? And I realized there was a gap in coaching, specifically around people who've had trauma and shame in the approach, because you can't heal trauma and shame with the same voice that caused it, right? And so there's often this aggressive push that happens in coaching, but also with the individual feeling like they're failing in that process, and they shame themselves out of the process of healing. And so I decided to go at it from the lessons that I'd learned, as well as an approach of empathy and self-compassion. So that's how I got started.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for what you do. In
Yeah.
your opinion, why is everything you talk about have to do with mental health, right? Like, why is mental health so important for our overall wellness?
Yeah, because I think a lot of what happens in between these, two ears of ours determines so much of our life. And I think that it's like a both end, right? My physical health, my overall health helps determine my mental health. But for me, as an advocate of mental health, I think the stories that I tell myself about my worth, whether or not I'm worthy of investing in my own overall health, is just key. And in getting that straightened out and doing the process of healing and going on the journey to begin to see ourselves as lovable and worthy of care and to be able to show up for ourselves, I think it's like a foundation to be able to move into other forms of self-care and overall wellness.
I mean, this is totally echoing the powerful quote you have on your website, which reads, when I realized I was the source of my own suffering, I realized I could also be the source of my own healing.
Yeah.
It's incredible. How did you come up to this realization?
Yeah. I was sitting in a room and I was just beginning to have these feelings of shame and suffering. And I realized that it was the stories that I was having in my head, right? Because pain is something that happens in a moment. There's this isolated moment of pain that happens, but suffering is the story or the meaning that I assign to that pain. And pain happens, but suffering is carried. It's something that I carry with me. And so I began to realize that if I had that much power, that much control in my thinking and what I was carrying to produce that kind of suffering, I also was capable of changing that narrative and bringing a different story and a different meaning. And then that could begin to bring healing in my life. And I think we underestimate. We really are good at thinking about how well we are at causing suffering, but we really underestimate the healing power that we have, the stories that we tell ourselves, the way that we treat ourselves, the self-love that can show up in our lives that begins to transform those stories and the pain that happened.
I really love this like positive and also very active way of thinking about it rather than passive. This is incredible. So today's topic mainly focusing on shame. What exactly is shame?
Boy, it's super complex, right? And I mean, sometimes we think it's a thinking pattern, but I think it gets wired in our systems. It's the way that we feel, and we have bodily responses. When we start to feel shame, we start to withdraw, we start to shrink. We have the inner critic that constantly beats us up. And so it's this very complex set of emotions, physiology, all the things that happen to us as a result of it. I like what the author Anais Nin said about it. It's a French author who said, shame is the lie that someone told you about yourself. And it's that lie that happens that we then begin to tell ourselves that lie. We begin to repeat that lie. And I think that shame often gets handed to us. It's something, I don't think we're born with it. I don't think they're inherently born bad, but there's this thing that happens where it gets transferred to us. And we begin to play that out with the narratives that happen and the behaviors that reinforce that in our life. I love what Brene Brown also says, shame is the most powerful master emotion. It is the fear that we are not enough. That this shame is the sense that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. I'm fundamentally broken. I'm separated from love. I'm unlovable. It's extremely painful, but fortunately healable.
So in your experience, like what are some common causes of shame?
Yeah, I think one for sure is trauma, whether it's childhood trauma or trauma we experience later in life as we begin to think, like, why did this happen to me? What's wrong with me that this was happening to me? Why would somebody treat me this way? It can happen from just societal pressures, expectations and culture, that certain behaviors or a certain way that a person should look or a certain role that a person should play, in your community, expectations around how a person should be able, their body should be able to respond. And, there's something wrong with me because I'm not able to, become pregnant, or there's something wrong with me that I'm not able to provide as a man or produce or whatever that is. So it's trauma, it's culture, it's life experiences where things might have collapsed around you and you think, well, what's wrong with me that would have happened? So it's complex, and I think it's like multi-sourced.
You had a really great, like, thought-provoking post on your feed about being addicted to shame.
Yeah.
How does this happen?
Yeah, I think when we start to identify with shame, right, and we begin to see ourselves as shame, it becomes like home for us. And the challenge with that is that our brains get used to thinking certain thoughts, and those thoughts kick up, and then the feelings and the emotions that go with that. It's interesting, the research behind my brain not always knowing the difference between a memory or an image and something actually happening in the present moment. And then the neural pathways that start to get wired as we connect thought and emotion together, it runs those grooves pretty deeply in our brain. And so I think we've all probably had this experience where I'm feeling really good about myself, day's going well, and wow, things, I feel good. I feel good about who I am as a person. Then all of a sudden this thought kicks up that tells me all the reasons why I shouldn't feel good about myself, or reminds me of something that happened in my past that I'm ashamed of. Well, I think what's happening is our systems are seeking out some equilibrium as to what we're actually used to feeling. And so we're used to feeling shame. So when we start to move away from it, our brain will kick up the thought, which will then kick up the emotion. And I get caught in a pattern that is an addiction to that feeling. I get so used to feeling that way. Now, the challenge becomes that I become so identified with that once again, I start thinking, see, you're never going to change. You were making progress, but yep, those thoughts. Now, if I can separate it being a habit that I've formed, a neurochemical process that's going on with me from my identity, I really start to take tactics towards changing the behavior and breaking the habit versus it being me as a person. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think many people probably have experienced this, that, when you feel shame, you also wanted to.
Oh, lost you. Oh, no worries. No worries.
When we feel shame, that we also tend to try to please others. And can pleasing others play a role in creating this shame cycle?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it does, right? Because I think that people pleasing it gets so complex, right? So people pleasing for me, I think, is the space of trying to show that I'm lovable, that I'm likable, right? So I feel this sense of shame and I feel this need to please you. And that if I can please you, then I'll get your acceptance. Once I get your acceptance, then I can start to maybe feel good about myself. And then ultimately what I can do is then begin to accept myself. So you become a validator for me that I'm acceptable because I've pleased you. You've said I'm acceptable. And so now that validates to my system that, oh, maybe I am acceptable. Well, the challenge with that is that we have this inner critic that no matter how much we do for other people, that we're always going to find a reason why it wasn't good enough or why we disappointed them, or we start to overcommit to pleasing people. And then we fall short of the expectations that we've set or the things that we committed to, which brings more shame. And then we feel bad about being a people pleaser. And so it's like this multi kind of hairy thing. I mean, shame is one of those super sticky, complex things that I'm trying to please you so that I can get rid of my shame. But in doing that, I'm simply reinforcing the sense of shame. And so I'm just trying to validate to myself that I'm worthy of your love. And so I'm going to show you why I'm worthy of it. But yet I fall short of that. So
now we've talked about, the cycle of shame, like some of the background, like why this happens. Now let's talk about the solutions. You had a really awesome post about combating shame with curiosity. How can we do this?
Yeah. So I'm a super big proponent of self-love. I mean, how we ever got to a place where self-love was seen as something that was either soft or something that was, to be dismissed, or that we became more comfortable with feeling bad about ourselves than we did feeling good about ourselves. It's, such an interesting thing with us as humans. But the curiosity piece is that piece that I think drives us towards self-love. Instead of shaming myself for feeling shame, I can become curious about it. Like, why is this here? And what it does is it interrupts my thinking pattern for just long enough. It creates some space, gets me out of that shame rabbit hole that I've gone down, which is like, oh, I'm so bad, I'm this and that. And then I just need a disruptor. And that curiosity becomes a question asker. Like, well, why do I feel this way? When did this first show up in my life? What part of me is feeling this? Okay, the part of me that's feeling the shame, and when it first showed up in my life, can then ask the question of like, what does that part of me need? Why is it feeling this way? Why does it need that? And then I can begin to respond to that part of myself with compassion, because I can see it as a part of me that is wanting to get something met. And then I begin to ask it, what do you need? I can then figure out ways to meet that with what it needs, which is often self-love, self-acceptance, and giving myself a break from the constant voice that's beating me up in my head.
You almost answered my next question. My next question is, what are some ways we can alter the way we speak to ourselves?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake we often make in addressing our inner critic, or the part of it's beating ourselves up, and how we speak to ourselves. And then one of the number one mistakes we do is we come at it with the voice of another inner critic. So we have this voice that's telling us, ah, man, you really screwed that up. Why did you have to do it that way? You're a loser. You're always doing things, whatever that voice is for you. And then we come at it with, why can't I just shut up? Why can't I just stop talking to myself that way? What's wrong with me that I can't be positive about myself? Well, I'm just keeping the cycle going. And so I think, once again, the curiosity of disrupting that voice in my head and trying to figure out, how is it trying to serve me? Is it trying to keep me safe? Why am I communicating to myself this way? And then what I like to do is encourage people to get a mantra, right? So this is something that worked for me, right? And a mantra is a little bit different than a positive affirmation. So I can have a positive affirmation, and it's basic semantics sometimes, but the connection here is the words, the thought, and the emotion that goes with it. So I can just do a positive affirmation and do it kind of rotely and have no connection to the feeling or the emotion, which helps me rewire myself. But when I have a mantra that says, no, I am lovable, I am worthy of love, and that begins to be repeated, but it's also connected with an emotion that I begin to sense and feel. How would I feel if I was lovable? How would I feel? What would it feel like to give myself love? I begin to experience that in the present moment. What I'm doing is I'm once again connecting the thinking pattern with the emotion pattern and beginning to visualize myself differently. And so it's a huge disruptor and beginning to change the inner critic.
That's incredible, because you can almost feel not just the mental change, but also the physiological change when you connecting them.
Absolutely. And there's some of these, for some of the things that I was dealing with, I got to say 6 months, 9 months using the mantra and the energy connection, the emotional connection. I would literally at times, and I encourage my folks that I'm coaching to stay at it until they feel maybe just a little shift inside, some kind of emotional or some kind of that they start to actually believe it. They actually start to feel differently. And so that's why I think the connection of the emotions, the thoughts, and the words are more than just, it's a part of rewiring. So, yeah.
Wow. You're also a guilt expert. I feel like guilt and shame many times just come together. Is there a difference between guilt and shame?
Yeah, and I'd say I'm a student of guilt and a student of shame, and expert. I don't know. I'm just learning the processes.
Oh, you are.
Unfortunately, I've become so acquainted with it throughout my life that it's been a bedfellow that I've had to study in order to heal. But yeah, I think if you look at kind of some of the definitions, guilt is usually healthy guilt, if there is such a thing, versus unhealthy guilt. Healthy guilt attached to a behavior or something that I did that I don't like. Now, I'm not going to say, because often people say, well, guilt is the feeling of when I do something wrong. I don't like that I did something wrong. I'm not going to use the word wrong, because I think that you can still feel guilt around something that's not wrong, like self-care, and choices that you make that are for your best health and benefit, but you still feel guilt around it. So I guess I would say guilt is about an action or a thing that we do that we don't maybe feel good about, versus shame being not feeling good about myself, right? And so as I look at guilt and separate guilt as an action or a behavior that I can learn from, that I then want to try to figure out how to correct if I need to, or correct how I feel about it. For instance, if I'm doing self-care and I feel guilty, it doesn't mean I need to stop doing self-care. It means that maybe I need to figure out how do I change my energy with putting myself first at times. And then, where shame is just, hey, there's something wrong with me as a person. So, yeah.
So are there different coping mechanisms for guilt that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think, once again, I'll go back to the curiosity, because I think curiosity is a huge play, because it is such a disruptor. I think that, looking at guilt as something that is trying to serve me as a way of saying there's something that I did that I just don't feel the best about, either how it was done or how I feel about it afterwards. And so recognizing that it's a behavior and that it's not you as a person, And then I encourage people to become this process of writing things down, like what happened, where did it come from, uh, is it true? Byron Katie's great book on loving what is. Is it true? How do you know it's true? Is it true that you did something wrong? And then beginning, because we'll get this thing like, I did that, I'm a horrible person, because you can have guilt over an action, but then guilt can get really embedded, right? You just feel so guilty about an action. So that unhealthy guilt shows us no way out, where a healthy guilt can show us a way out. And that way out can be, I need to make amends with somebody, or I need to learn how to do that behavior differently, or I need to be comfortable with honoring myself when I need to instead of feeling guilty about it. And so that process of writing that out, getting to the point of like, was it externally imposed guilt? Was it internally an internal response of I want to show up better, I want to show up different, do very different things, different approaches, but still getting to that thing of, can I find a way out? And then what is that way out? Is it amends? Is it showing up different? And then taking action on it. Because if I don't take action, the guilt remains. The guilt can remain. If I take action, it can help subside it, because I show my brain, my body, that I'm doing something to move forward, bringing solutions.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. These topics are so complicated.
They are, aren't they? Yeah.
And I felt like you have so many tools in your toolbox. You're really like trying to help people. And I could see that the coaching really matters, and that you can have this more personalized approach to really help people to get out of their shame or guilt cycle. So tell us, like, does the session with you look like?
Yeah. So the first thing we want to do is I usually do a 30-minute kind of discovery call to figure out if it's a good connection, a good fit. And then we go through a process, right, of looking at how did the shame show up? And often people don't realize that it's shame that they're dealing with. They just feel like there's these strange behaviors that show up in my life. I keep self-sabotaging. I have these addictions. I'm trying to cope with this feeling of unworthiness, that I'm not enough. So we work through a process of coming to realize, what is it that we're dealing with? What then are the origins of that shame? Where did that come from? Because once we understand where it came from, we can then begin to heal and address those spaces that started it. And then we begin to do a roadmap that says, hey, I'm here, but I want to go here. And what does that look like? How do we move from shame to self-love? And then the healing practices that are a part of that journey that do help us begin to rewire. And I sometimes call it the FAST method, because we can move a little faster when we connect the whole thing of our feelings, our actions, our speech, or the things that we say, and then our thoughts, connecting all that together. Because what we're after, because you can heal trauma, you can heal the sources of this stuff, but still carry the shame because it's embedded, and then figure out how to kind of de-identify with it and de-link it and get our systems to find home in self-love instead of in shame. So,
wow. How do people sign up?
My website, jerryhenderson.org, or if you're here on Instagram, you just go to the link tree, click there. There's a little waiting list that you can join on one-on-one coaching. Then takes you to the website. There's a form to fill out, and then we take it from there. And the spot's open. Then I do a 30-minute intake call, as I said, or a discovery call. We both feel, does it work? And we move from there. So
awesome. You also have a podcast that coming out soon called Permission to Love.
Yep.
So what is it about, and when are we expecting the first episode?
Yeah, absolutely. So first episode, I believe, is the 21st of May. And it's about the idea that what we're looking for is ultimately permission to love ourselves. And we withhold that permission from ourselves. And in my journey, and then looking and coaching others, we usually get to a space where we go, wow, the ability to give yourself permission to love yourself. And what are the barriers that are keeping you from giving yourself that permission? Well, I was traumatized as a kid, and I don't feel worthy of love, or I did these things, or I'm in a culture that says that I'm not supposed to, or as a man, you're supposed to do that on stage, talk about that, and we want to address that. But there's all these things that, you know, have barriers for us. And so it's really about looking at trauma, shame, addictions, and the barriers that we have to loving ourselves, and how self-love can heal us and transform us on our journey. So,
Wow, that's incredible. I think you're also the person who told me that this month is a mental health awareness month.
it is. Absolutely.
Wow, the episode Permission to Love coming out during this month, it's perfect timing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to do that. And I've got a journal that I'm going to be releasing this month about, that's 14 days, or it could be 15 days. I'm writing the last, day on it, but of how do we, reflect on and start to move from shame to self-love. And so it'll be released this month as well. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all these insights and then joining us today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for what you do. I mean, helping people understand, what's going on with their systems. And, for the folks that are going to be seeing this on, my, Instagram feed, or whatever, can you tell a little bit about what you're doing and the passion behind that?
Yes. So at Million Marker, we provide at home environmental toxin tests. And the goal is to provide people the information so they understand their exposure levels, because these exposure really impact our health and wellness, starting from fertility. And these exposures are something that we can really take control of it, instead of, relying on when you get sick to prevent this disease or manage. You can really take action and prevent just simple lifestyle swaps, from not touching receipts to swapping out more safer and sustainable products that you can use. So it's not only, you're creating a good lifestyle and a good body for yourself, but also helping with a much more sustainable environment.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I encourage everybody in my world to go check it out and partner up with Million Marker. And, the things that I think, even in our toxins in our system that we're not aware of, that affect the way that we think, feel about ourselves. And so it's a part of that complete total health. So thank you for what you're doing to bring awareness to this and help people be empowered to make changes.
Totally aligned. One thing we're trying to ask experts like you to come to our Instagram live is also for the same reason that, wellness is not just about removing your toxins, right? It's about your mental health. It's about how to finding your path to get rid of shame. And all these things are so important to maintain your health. So thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. All right.
It's
been a joy.
Yeah.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sure.